On a dark, stormy night, a lone driver, Sarah, found herself speeding down an empty highway. The rain was pouring, and the wind howled, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. She'd been on the road for hours, and fatigue was beginning to take its toll. As she passed mile marker 23, she noticed something strange. A figure standing at the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched from the rain, her clothes tattered, and her face obscured by a long, wet curtain of hair. Sarah slowed down, unsure whether to stop. She hesitated but couldn't bring herself to drive past someone in need. Pulling over, she rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. The woman lifted her head slowly, revealing hollow, lifeless eyes. Her lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. "No, I don't need help," she whispered, her voice cold and distant. "But you do." Before Sarah could react, the woman slammed her hand against the car window, making a loud, echoing thud. Sarah screamed and slammed the gas pedal, speeding off into the night. But the road ahead seemed endless, no matter how fast she drove. The storm grew more violent, the winds howling louder. Every time she glanced in her rearview mirror, the woman was there, standing in the same spot, her smile widening, her eyes following Sarah's every move. Eventually, Sarah came upon a rest stop, hoping to find some safety. As she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed the same woman standing under the flickering streetlight, staring directly at her. But this time, Sarah was no longer alone. Hundreds of ghostly figures, all drenched and standing in eerie silence, gathered around the rest stop. The woman's voice echoed in Sarah's ears. "You should never stop on this highway. No one leaves here." In that moment, Sarah realized she had driven into a cursed stretch of road, and she was never meant to leave. The ghosts of those who had disappeared long ago watched her from the shadows, waiting for her to join them in eternal torment. Years passed, and the highway remained as desolate as ever, its reputation growing darker with each passing year. Travelers who dared to take the road after sunset would whisper of the mysterious disappearances, and tales of mile marker 23 spread like wildfire. No one ever stopped to check if someone was stranded, for fear that they too might fall victim to the curse of the highway. One cold evening, a young couple, Mark and Rachel, found themselves driving down this very road. They were lost, further from their destination than they realized, and the storm was growing more intense. The wind battered their car, making it hard to see beyond the windshield. Their GPS had gone haywire, and all they could do was keep driving, hoping to find some sign of civilization. "How far are we from the next town?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling as she looked out into the darkened landscape. "I don't know," Mark said, glancing nervously at the empty road ahead. "But we need to stop. I can barely see through this storm." As they approached mile marker 23, they noticed something strange. A lone figure stood on the side of the road, just like Sarah had seen all those years ago. This time, it was a man, his clothes torn and soaked, his face obscured by his long, dark hair. Mark hesitated but couldn't ignore the desperate look in the stranger's eyes. He slowed the car to a crawl, the figure's gaze never leaving them. As the car stopped in front of the man, Mark rolled down the window just a crack. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "You need help?" The man's head tilted, his smile creeping across his face as he stepped closer. But it was not a welcoming smile. There was something deeply unsettling about it. "Do you know where you are?" the man asked, his voice hollow and distant. "We're lost," Rachel answered, her heart beginning to race. "We need to get out of here. Is there a gas station or something nearby?" The man took a step back, still smiling, but this time his expression shifted into something darker, colder. "You should have stayed lost," he muttered under his breath, his voice trailing off. "It's too late now. You're already here." Suddenly there was a loud thud against the side of the car. The couple froze. Mark slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the car shooting forward into the storm. But in the rearview mirror, something made Mark's blood run cold. The man, standing motionless in the middle of the road, was no longer alone. The figure of a woman appeared beside him, her face obscured by her wet hair, her eyes empty and watching. Rachel gasped. It's them," she whispered in horror. Mark didn't dare look back. He focused on the road, trying to outrun the storm, the shadowy figures in the rearview mirror growing closer with every second. The highway stretched before them, endless, like a twisting labyrinth of doom. But the more they drove, the more they felt trapped. The road seemed to warp, the world around them distorting. The trees along the side of the highway now seemed like twisted shadows, reaching out with gnarled fingers, trying to pull them into the night. "We're going in circles," Mark muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. "This road, it's not right." They came upon the same rest stop, the same flickering streetlight from Sarah's story. The figures were there again, standing in silence, their hollow eyes watching as Mark and Rachel approached. They tried to drive past, but the car jerked to a sudden stop as if an invisible force had seized it. The woman appeared before them once more, her face now inches from the windshield, her mouth forming a chilling whisper. "You're one of us now." With a final, helpless scream, Rachel reached for the door handle, but before she could escape, a sharp, piercing cold swept over them, and the figures closed in. The last thing they saw was the twisted smile of the woman, the same smile that had haunted so many before them. Mark and Rachel never made it out of that highway, and when the next driver passed mile marker 23, they swore they saw two new faces among the ghosts, their eyes hollow, trapped in the endless nightmare of the cursed highway. Months passed, but the curse of the highway remained. The eerie tales continued to circulate, warning travelers to avoid mile marker 23 at all costs. Yet despite the warnings, the highway was still used by those who had no choice but to drive through it. Many had heard the stories, but none truly believed in the supernatural until they, too, encountered the horror that awaited them. One night, a lone trucker named David found himself on the highway. He had driven these roads for years, and while he had heard the rumors about the cursed stretch of highway, he dismissed them as nothing more than urban legends. His truck was full of supplies, and he needed to get to the next town before dawn. The storm, however, had caught him off guard, and his headlights barely cut through the thick downpour. As he drove through the night, he noticed something strange in the distance. A flickering light, like a lantern, swaying in the storm. Curious, David slowed his truck and approached. The light led him to a dilapidated rest stop, the same one that Mark and Rachel had encountered. He parked his truck, unsure of why he felt the need to stop, but something compelled him to. As he stepped out into the rain, the heavy, suffocating silence wrapped around him. It was almost as if the storm had quieted to a whisper, as if the entire world was holding its breath. David's boots splashed against the wet pavement as he made his way toward the old building. The flickering light illuminated a small wooden bench near the entrance, but there was no sign of life. He looked around, puzzled. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing unnervingly in the stillness. "Anyone here?" There was no response, only the sound of the wind and the distant rumble of thunder. But as he turned to leave, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. A cold chill ran down his spine. He turned back toward the bench, and there, sitting in the dark, was a figure, a woman, drenched and hunched forward, her face hidden beneath a mess of dark, wet hair. Her back was turned to him, but David could feel her presence as if she was waiting for something. "Are you all right?" David asked, his voice wavering slightly. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he couldn't leave her out there. The woman slowly lifted her head, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She didn't smile, but there was an unsettling calm in her gaze. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said, her voice soft but somehow distorted, as though it came from a far-off place. "It's already too late." Before David could react, the temperature dropped suddenly. The woman stood up in one fluid motion, her movements unnaturally smooth. As she stepped closer to him, the air around him thickened with a weight he couldn't shake off. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart racing. "You'll join us now," she whispered, the sound echoing in his mind. David backed away, but no matter how far he tried to retreat, the woman kept pace, her eyes locked on his, her expression unreadable. The rest stop seemed to distort before him, the walls bending and warping, as if reality itself was unraveling. The shadows of countless figures now stood at the edge of his vision, lost souls, just like the others, watching him with hollow eyes. Suddenly David heard a crash from behind him, followed by the sound of scraping metal. He spun around and saw his truck's door slowly creaking open on its own. As if guided by an unseen hand, the truck's engine roared to life, its headlights flashing wildly. The figures, now growing more numerous, began to gather around him, their murmurs rising into a cacophony of voices. Desperate, David tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, as though the very earth was pulling him back. He stumbled toward the truck, but the woman was there again, standing before him, blocking his path. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice now a chilling command. "We all belong to the highway." David's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. This highway was no ordinary road. It was a cursed, eternal trap, a place where those who ventured in, whether they believed or not, were doomed to join the ranks of the lost. No one who passed mile marker 23 ever left. They became part of the highway's twisted story, trapped in an endless loop of torment and despair. As the woman's hand reached out for him, David felt a sharp coldness sweep through his body, like ice spreading through his veins. He tried to scream, but his voice was lost to the howling wind. The figures closed in, their touch cold and unyielding, pulling him into the darkness. The next morning, when a passing motorist slowed down at mile marker 23, they would see no trace of David or his truck. The rest stop stood silent, its dim lights flickering in the storm's wake, and the highway stretched endlessly before them. But if they looked closely in the rearview mirror, they would see it, a flash of a familiar face among the shadows, his hollow eyes staring out from the darkness, forever a part of the cursed highway. And so, the highway continued its endless cycle, the lost souls of the past forever mingling with the new, as the curse of mile marker 23 claimed yet another victim.
The first storyteller is dead in an accident. Days turned into weeks, and the horror of mile marker 23 remained just a whisper on the wind, an unspoken fear for those who drove the highway at night. The stories of the vanished were passed along in hushed tones, each telling a bit more chilling than the last. Yet despite the warnings, some still ventured onto that cursed stretch of road, unaware of the fate that awaited them. One particularly stormy night, a young woman named Emma, on her way to visit her sister in a nearby town, found herself driving through the same highway. She had heard the stories but was skeptical, dismissing them as mere ghost tales. She had driven long stretches of lonely roads before, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. But tonight, something felt different, almost as if the road itself was calling to her. The rain came down in sheets, making it difficult to see, and the wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches with unnatural force. Emma tried to focus on the road ahead, but her headlights flickered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows across the path. As she neared mile marker 23, a strange feeling washed over her, a sensation of being watched, of being drawn towards something she couldn't see. Her heart pounded in her chest as she felt the weight of the silence around her, broken only by the sound of the rain tapping against the windshield. And then, as if on cue, the faint flicker of a light appeared in the distance. It was a single dim lantern swaying in the wind, its glow barely visible against the storm. Emma felt an inexplicable urge to stop. She told herself it was just a rest stop, maybe someone in need of help, but deep down she knew there was something more, something that tugged at her like an unseen force. As she slowed the car, Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it only grew stronger as she came closer. The rest stop came into view just as it had in the stories, old decaying with a flickering light barely hanging on to its last breath. She parked the car, the engine's hum fading into the night, leaving her surrounded by the ominous silence. Her breath misted up the window as she hesitated. She thought about turning back, but the pull was too strong. Reluctantly, she stepped out of the car and made her way toward the entrance of the rest stop. The sound of her footsteps seemed deafening in the silence, echoing through the deserted lot. When she entered, the dim light revealed only a few dusty chairs and broken tables. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and the strange sensation of being watched was overwhelming. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, making the entire space seem distorted and warped. "Hello?" Emma called out, her voice shaking. "Is anyone here?" There was no answer. Her eyes moved around the room, and that's when she saw them, the figures. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick of the light. But no, they were there. Dozens of them, standing at the far end of the room, their eyes empty, their faces a blur of forgotten memories. They were staring at her, unmoving, their presence sending a wave of cold dread down her spine. Emma's heart began to race as she turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the windows. She spun around in panic, only to see the woman, the same woman from the stories, standing in front of her, her face shrouded in wet hair, her hollow eyes locking onto Emma's. "You shouldn't have come," the woman whispered, her voice cold and final. "Now you're part of it, just like the others." Emma tried to move, but her legs felt like lead. The air grew heavier, suffocating her as the figures began to move, slowly, deliberately, closing in around her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she backed away toward the door, only to find it sealed tight. Suddenly, the room around her began to twist. The walls stretched, the ceiling dropped, and the floor seemed to rise. The figures weren't just watching her anymore. They were moving, reaching out, their hands cold and skeletal. Emma tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She felt a cold hand touch her shoulder and then another until she was completely surrounded. The woman's voice echoed in her ears, now more sinister than ever. "You're here forever." And just like that, the rest stop was empty again, the storm raging outside the same as it always had. Emma was gone, vanished, just like those who had come before her. The next morning, a trucker passing by mile marker 23 slowed his vehicle, noticing the familiar rest stop in the distance. He had heard the rumors, but he was no stranger to lonely roads. He pulled into the lot, his headlights cutting through the fog and rain, and there was no sign of Emma, no evidence that anyone had been there the night before. The rest stop stood eerily silent, the light still flickering in the storm. But if you looked closely, you would see it. The faintest outline of Emma's face, her eyes wide in terror, staring from the window of the rest stop, trapped in the cycle of lost souls that plagued the highway. And as the trucker drove on, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him, waiting for him to make the same mistake. Mile marker 23 would always claim its victims, its curse never-ending, an eternal reminder that once you entered its domain, you could never leave. The highway lived on, and so did the restless spirits forever lost on that cursed stretch of road. The rumors of mile marker 23 spread far and wide, whispered between truckers, travelers, and locals who lived nearby. Yet, despite the warnings, some still ventured onto that cursed stretch of highway, oblivious to the fate awaiting them. No matter how many times the stories were told, it always seemed like there was someone else, a new soul who found themselves caught in the endless loop of torment. Months passed, and the road, drenched by the never-ending storms, remained silent, waiting. And then, one cold evening, a man named Robert, an investigator specializing in paranormal phenomena, decided he would confront the highway's dark legend once and for all. Robert was no stranger to the supernatural. He had encountered haunted places before, but nothing had intrigued him quite like mile marker 23. Something about the stories, the disappearances, the cold hands of the lost souls reaching for those who stopped, pulled at him. Armed with his camera, a notebook, and a deep sense of skepticism, Robert set out to uncover the truth. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. What he thought he was chasing was a hoax, something explainable by logic and reason, but deep down a small part of him wondered, what if? The storm was relentless as he drove down the highway, the rain pelting his windshield and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The air grew thicker as he approached mile marker 23, the faintest glimmer of light coming into view. He had read about the rest stop, but now, standing before it, there was an overwhelming sense of unease, as if the highway itself were watching him. He parked his car, the headlights flickering as he stepped out into the pouring rain. As he approached the rest stop, he noticed something strange. The light was on, but it was weak, almost as if it were struggling to stay alive. He could see the silhouette of the building, its windows cracked and stained with years of neglect. The silence was absolute, oppressive, as though the world itself had paused. "Hello?" Robert called out into the darkness, his voice bouncing off the empty parking lot. No answer. He stepped closer to the door, pushing it open with a creak. The inside of the rest stop was as dilapidated as the outside, with peeling paint and broken furniture scattered around. But what struck him most was the feeling, the unnatural stillness, the sense that something was terribly wrong. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. He couldn't make out the details, but it was there, watching him. "Who's there?" Robert asked, his voice sounding more uncertain than he would have liked. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It stood motionless, as if it were waiting for something. Robert's heart raced. He raised his camera, aiming it at the figure and snapping a few quick pictures. But as the flash lit up the room, the figure vanished, fading into the shadows like smoke dissipating in the wind. He stepped back, unsure of what he had just witnessed. He had expected something, maybe a trick of the light, or an animal, or a person hiding, but what he had seen was not explainable by logic. His heart pounded in his chest, and his instinct told him to leave, to get back into his car and drive away. But as he turned to go, he felt it, a cold hand, cold as ice, brush against the back of his neck. He whipped around, but the rest stop was empty. The figures were gone. Panic set in. Robert turned back to the door, but now it was locked, the handle stuck as if someone or something was holding it from the other side. The air was thick with an icy fog, and the faint sound of whispers filled his ears. The voices were soft at first, distant, but they grew louder and more urgent. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Pleading. As the voices surrounded him, Robert's breathing became shallow, his chest tightening with each passing second. He stumbled backward, trying to free himself from the rest stop, but he was trapped. The walls seemed to close in, shifting and warping around him, bending the very fabric of reality. The voices were everywhere now, deafening, their whispers turning into frantic cries. "Help! Help us, please!" Robert spun around, his eyes wild, his mind unraveling with fear. And then he saw them. Dozens of figures, standing motionless at the edges of the room, their hollow eyes fixed on him. Faces twisted in eternal anguish, each one a lost soul, trapped forever in this nightmare. Among them he saw the familiar face of the woman, the same one from the stories. Her hollow eyes locked onto his, and for a moment there was recognition. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice cold and unforgiving. "You're just like the others." Suddenly the figures surged forward, their cold hands reaching for him, dragging him into the shadows. His scream was swallowed by the whirlwind of whispers and cries that filled the room. As Robert was pulled deeper into the darkness, the rest stop returned to its eerie silence. The storm outside raged on, and the highway stretched endlessly, waiting for its next victim. Days later, a passing motorist noticed a flicker of light at mile marker 23. He slowed his car and pulled into the rest stop, looking around. There was no sign of Robert, no evidence of anyone having been there, but as he stepped out of his vehicle, he thought he heard something, a soft whisper almost indistinguishable from the wind. And if he looked closely at the broken windows of the rest stop, he might have seen it, a new face among the lost souls, staring out from the darkness, waiting for the next traveler to stop. The cycle continued. The highway, with its endless twists and turns, kept claiming new souls, its curse never ending. And the figures, forever trapped, forever wandering, remained at mile marker 23, an eternal reminder of the road's dark hold. No one ever truly left. The months bled into years, and the legend of mile marker 23 became a quiet yet persistent warning passed along by weary travelers. It was a tale whispered in hushed tones, one that many heard but few dared believe. And those who did venture through the stormy nights found themselves trapped by the highway's dark embrace, unable to escape its endless cycle of terror. One such soul, Amelia, a young journalist eager to uncover the truth behind urban legends, found herself on that very road one fateful evening. She had heard the stories of mile marker 23, but thought them nothing more than folklore exaggerated by the fear of a few unlucky drivers. Amelia wasn't the superstitious type. Armed with her camera and a determination to reveal the truth, she set off on her journey, her mind clear and focused. It was well past midnight when she found herself on the highway. The rain was torrential, reducing visibility to nearly zero, and the winds howled as though trying to warn her. But Amelia pressed on, her car's headlights barely cutting through the storm. The road seemed endless, the stretch of highway swallowing her whole. As she approached mile marker 23, she slowed her car instinctively, as though a force beyond her control was guiding her toward the rest stop. The fog was thick now, so dense that she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but through the mist, she could just make out the flickering light of the rest stop. Despite her skepticism, a sudden, inexplicable unease settled in her chest. It wasn't just the storm, it was something else, something ancient, lurking. She told herself it was just her imagination. But still, she slowed her car even further, deciding to stop for a quick break. The moment she stepped out of her car, she felt the temperature drop sharply. Her breath came out in foggy puffs as she made her way to the entrance. The rest stop was exactly as the stories described, run-down, abandoned, with an eerie sense of stillness hanging in the air. Amelia didn't think she would find anything, maybe just an old, forgotten building, perhaps a few signs of the previous occupants, but what she saw inside made her blood run cold. The walls were cracked and the floor was covered in layers of dust and dirt, but what made her heart stop was the sudden, overwhelming sense of being watched. The air was thick, as though something unseen was breathing with her, and then she saw them, Standing at the far end of the rest stop, figures, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes vacant. Amelia froze in place, the hairs on her neck standing up. She quickly reached for her camera, clicking a few photos, though her hands were trembling. The flash illuminated the room briefly, and when it did, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. The figures were closer. They hadn't moved, but somehow they were nearer, growing, multiplying in the blink of an eye. Panic surged through her. She spun around to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping her inside. Her heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed the handle and yanked it, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. "Help!" she cried, her voice echoing in the stillness, but no sound returned. Only the whispering voices of the lost souls surrounded her. They were murmuring, their words indistinguishable but chilling in their intensity. Amelia backed away, her mind racing. She could hear them now, dozens of voices pleading, crying out for release. Each whisper sounded familiar, almost like her own voice, until one whispered directly into her ear, "You shouldn't have come. You're one of us now." A cold hand brushed her shoulder, sending a shockwave of terror through her body. She spun around to face the woman, the same figure that had haunted the rest stop for years. Her hair hung long and wet, her face gaunt and hollow, her eyes pools of darkness. "Please, let me go," Amelia begged, tears stinging her eyes. "I don't belong here." The woman's lips curled into a twisted smile, but it wasn't one of kindness. "No one leaves, not once you've found the highway." Amelia's knees buckled beneath her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The figures around her closed in, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She tried to scream, but no sound left her throat. As the darkness swallowed her, she felt herself fading, pulled into the void with the others, trapped in the cycle of the highway's curse. The storm outside raged on, and the rest stop stood silent once again, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to drive into its grasp. Days later, a lone trucker found himself driving along the same stretch of road. He had heard the stories, but he didn't believe in ghosts or curses. As he passed mile marker 23, he slowed down, thinking about the strange rumors that had haunted this highway for years. His truck was low on fuel, and the storm was too fierce to drive any further. He decided to stop at the rest stop for a quick break. When he stepped out of the truck, the air was heavy and a faint chill ran through him. He shrugged it off and made his way inside. The rest stop was deserted, just as he had expected, but something about the silence was unnerving, too quiet, too still, and he wandered around for a few minutes before stopping near the window. The rain lashed against the glass, and through the mist he saw something strange, a figure standing just outside. The silhouette was barely visible in the storm, but the figure was unmistakable. He stepped closer to the window, squinting to get a better look, but as soon as he did, the figure vanished, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. He quickly turned around, his heart racing. Something was wrong, but when he reached the door to leave, it was already too late. The temperature plummeted. He felt the cold hands of the lost souls brush against him, their cries filling his ears, and a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come." The rest stop fell silent again, as it had countless times before. The highway was still, waiting for the next traveler to enter its deadly embrace. No one ever left mile marker 23,